It's time for Security Now with Steve Gibson. I'm Jason Howell, filling in for Leo once again. We've got news from the Edge, Microsoft Edge, an attack on internet-connected QNAP NAS devices, why connecting to rental cars via apps might not be such a great idea after all, and Steve checks in on the DNS-Over-HTTPS controversy, and the BlueKeep attacks have begun. Steve Gibson's going to break it all down for you next on Security Now.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 739, recorded Tuesday, November 5th, 2019. DOH and Bluekeep. This episode of Security Now is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Hiring isn't easy, but there's one place you can go where hiring is simple and smart. That place is ZipRecruiter, where growing businesses connect to qualified candidates. Try it for free at ziprecruiter.com/securitynow. And by LastPass, a personal password manager and identity solution for businesses all in one. You only need one master password, and LastPass remembers the rest. Visit lastpass.com/twit to learn more. And by CacheFly, give your users the seamless online experience they want. Power your site or app with CacheFly CDN and be 30% faster than the competition. You can learn more at securitynow.cachefly.com. It's time for Security Now with Steve Gibson and myself, Jason Howell, filling in for Leo, week 3. How you doing, Steve?
Great. Good to be with you for... This is 3 of our 4, right?
That's right.
You one more week next week, and then and then I'm up there on Saturday, the November 30th. So
that is it, indeed.
The fires are out, and things are calming down now. The air quality has been restored.
It's really interesting in like dealing with that scenario, because there for like 4 or 5, 6 days. It was everything that anyone was talking about, locally. It was just like fire was on the mind. And then the second it dissipates, it's like quite literally back to normal life. And it's it's just the kind of counterpoint between one extreme to the other is very interesting to me. But yeah, we are here and ready to talk some security. We actually have some folks sitting in the audience here today.
We have a guest audience, packed house.
Jim Lillard and Tim Lillard, both from Michigan, and Sharif Vallejo. Where are you from, Sharif? Oh, sorry. I thought that was your last name. I was like, Sharif Vallejo, where are you from? Sharif is from Vallejo. So there we go. He's here from Vallejo. So we got 3 guests sitting in for the show today. So, Steve, you got to talk some serious security. It's got to be serious today.
So we have episode 739 for November 5th. And there were 2 things I want to sort of update us on. One is DOH, and the other is Bluekeep. DOH, of course, is DNS-Over-HTTPS, which has turned out to be surprisingly controversial for everyone except users who think it's a good idea. But, that's really causing some fur to fly. So we're going to talk about that. And then, of course, Bluekeep is the much-anticipated end of the internet as we know it, which everyone keeps anticipating. Well, finally, we have attacks, but they are not what the internet expected, but they are what we were expecting on the podcast. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to end the show talking about that, but there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff happened this week. We've got I was affected by this, a widespread Windows breakage, which was introduced by last month's Patch Tuesday. It had been bothering me ever since the second Tuesday of October, and in putting the news together for this show, I stumbled upon its explanation. I implemented it, and it fixed the problem. So I'm sure I'm not alone, and I wouldn't be surprised. Let's see, this is the first Tuesday of November. I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft unfixes or unbreaks what they broke next week, and let's hope so, because this has to be affecting lots of other people. But we have a fix for it right now. We also have, speaking of fixing what was just broken, Chrome 78 has made some important changes to what they did in Chrome 77. So we'll discuss those. We have our new segment, News from the Edge, which is to say about Microsoft's Edge browser. It's a little less dramatic than the name.
I like that.
News from the Edge. We've also got the status. Now we're nearly 2 weeks downstream. The status of the attacks on Intel chips, which were the whole Spectrum meltdown thing. And, it does make you feel a little bit old when you realize that, okay, wait, Spectrum meltdown, that was the beginning of 2018. That's like, wow. Where did these 2 years go? Because that didn't seem like it was that long ago. We also have an important new attack on publicly exposed QNAP network attached storage boxes. I know that our listeners are bullish on those because after I did my conversation about we called it the Joy of Sync podcast a couple months ago, where I talked about my search for a really good way of synchronizing multiple locations and keeping directories synchronized. QNAP has some of their own software, and so I saw a lot of tweets from people who are using QNAP NAS devices. They need to make sure that they update to the firmware that just came out on November 1st. So we'll talk about that. We also have an interesting report about the significant risk of trusting managed service providers and maybe the need to push back on the kind of access that they, by default, want to have into their clients' networks. We've got the downside of apps for autos and worries over Chinese-made drones. So a whole bunch of fun stuff to talk about this week. It's going to be another great podcast as we approach number 999, which, of course, we all know is the end of Security Now. And with that, it will be the end of all security problems on the internet. So,
this is breaking news.
Well, I only have
breaking
digits.
News to me. That
have
episode 999 is the end of security issues.
My whole system is based on 3 digits, and so it's like the Y2K of Security Now, and it's lights out. And so Leo's been thinking, that's about okay. That's how long ago? When's that going to be? Okay, that kind of probably just works out. He'll be off on a cruise.
Okay,
and when we wrap around from 999 to 000. Actually, funny story.
I can clean up the mess while he's gone. It's fine.
I was eating I had a favorite Chinese restaurant which had a computer-based system for managing, that they put all their orders into and everything. And this was a Y2K problem because I'm sure they never licensed this software. And so when I first went in after the new year, after Y2K, their systems had gone from 1999 to 19100. So literally, like the 19 was hard coded in to the software, and the 99 went to 100. So the checks came out, and they were 5 digits. It's like 19100. So that was a bit of a problem.
Well,
so,
whatever works for you, business owner.
Anyway,
okay.
They knew I was a computer guy. They said, "What should we do?" And I said, "Well, why don't I'm like how leap year works, right?" And they go, "What?" And I said, "Okay, just go back, set everything back 4 years. The year won't be right, but at least things will kind of line up correctly."
Yes.
And anyway, so that's how they operated. Yeah, 19100.
And I'm curious to know if they're still dealing with that every 4 years.
Actually, they went out of business the summer of 9/11, the attacks of 9/11, because I don't know if you remember, but like the restaurant business took a big hit.
Yeah, it did. I remember that
after the 9/11 attacks because everyone was a little freaked out and like stayed home and ate popcorn and watched TV to see if everything was going to happen next. So anyway, that kind of did them in, even though they were the best Chinese restaurant place in Southern California.
Well, that's unfortunate.
And in other trivia, no. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Where are we going to go next? I know where we're going to go next. Let's take a quick break and thank the sponsor, and then we'll dive into all of the news that you've previewed for us just a few moments ago. This episode of Security Now is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Hiring can be a slow process. If you ever hired someone, it's never as easy as maybe it should be. You're always looking for the right person. Cafe Altura's COO Dylan Miskowitz needed to hire a director of coffee for his organic coffee company, but he was having trouble finding qualified applicants. Then he switched to ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It actually finds them for you. So it's kind of searching for you, so you don't have to do much of the heavy lifting there. Its technology identifies people with the right experience and invites them to apply to your job. So you end up getting qualified candidates fast. Dylan posted his job on ZipRecruiter and said he was impressed by how quickly he had great candidates applying to the position. He used the candidate rating feature in ZipRecruiter to filter his applicants and was able to focus on just the most relevant ones. And ultimately, that's how Dylan found his new director of coffee in just a few days. And so, you can imagine if you're running a business with results like that, it's no wonder that 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidates within the first day. It speeds up the whole process. I also know firsthand experience so I guess it's really secondhand, but my wife owns a business and she's used ZipRecruiter, and it was a fast process for her as well. She found a qualified candidate, and she had nothing but good things to say. So see why ZipRecruiter is effective for businesses of all sizes. Try ZipRecruiter for free at our web address. It's ziprecruiter.com/securitynow. That's ziprecruiter.com/securitynow. ZipRecruiter.com/securitynow. ZipRecruiter is the smartest way to hire, and we thank them for their support of Security Now. All right, so we're starting with, I guess this is a picture of the day, kind of?
Well, it is the picture of the week because it ties into our first story. This was literally what I have been facing ever since my Windows 7 machine updated after the second Tuesday of October. And there it shows me trying to bring up the digikey.com site. DigiKey is one of my favorite. It is actually my go-to site for electronic components, Mauser being second choice. And here it shows down in the lower left, establishing secure connection. And that's where it gets stuck. And that's trying after I hit refresh. After we got the unhappy web page icon, and it says this site can't be reached. www.digikey.com took too long to respond. And then it gives you some generic problems. So Windows broke something with last month's Patch Tuesday, which Microsoft has now acknowledged. And my sense is that since this is a core protocol thing, it can't be just me trying to get to one particular website that's been having problems. So as we've been recently discussing, I often, like you, Jason, you're a stronger user of Chrome. I'm fickle. So I'll often be. I'm a flip-flopper.
Okay.
I'll often be using Firefox. Normally, I actually have Firefox open statically in my lower left-hand display. That's just kind of where it lives. Over on the right is Windows Explorer. In the center is what I'm doing. So I sort of had like reference stuff around me, and then I have sort of a fixed layout for where things go, like what goes on which screen. So it's been my habit to open up a Chrome session in the center screen when I want to browse around DigiKey for some random electronics gizmo. Except that Chrome stopped being able to display DigiKey's site. It would, the thing would spin and eventually complain that it was unable to obtain a secure connection or any at all. And I mean, this has really been an issue. In the past few weeks, I've hit F12 to open Chrome's developer window to examine the exact error code that was returned. I thought that perhaps DigiKey might have somehow misconfigured their site. Because, I mean, again, I've used these guys for years, and never have I had a problem. So I remember I went over a couple of times actually to Ivan Ristik's SSL Labs site and had them scan DigiKey, but it got top marks from Ivan. So it didn't seem to be something there. And one of the more curious things was that Firefox never had any problem while Chrome wouldn't open DigiKey. Firefox just popped right up in Firefox. But I wanted to use Chrome, and I couldn't. So it turns out it wasn't just with DigiKey. Under Chrome, over the past few weeks, other random sites all over the internet started having trouble. And since I learned a long time ago that things that I'm experiencing are likely to be widespread, since I'm not doing anything weird, on a number of occasions over the last nearly a month, I would Google Chrome connection errors or Chrome connection timeout. I mean, I figured other people would be like noticing this and having problems, thinking that Google must have broken something on Chrome that would therefore be affecting lots of people. Very much like they did break something with Chrome 77. Well, not actually they broke it, and we'll be talking about this in a minute, where we talked about how if you had the unupdated version of Symantec's endpoint protection, people were getting the snap error from Chrome. But anyway, so as I said, as I was doing the research for today's news, I stumbled upon the cause. And I'm telling everyone who's listening, in case anyone else has been pulling their hair out with the same sort of problem, not being able to use Chrome in certain instances. So here's the story. I don't know how Microsoft managed to do this, but they they added support, that is enforcement, for an enhanced anti-man-in-the-middle protection involving TLS handshakes, which immediately broke Windows' ability to connect as a client or as a server to a significant number of the internet's websites. And what was interesting when I stumbled upon that was it was like this aha, because it perfectly explained why Firefox has continued to work. Because as we know, Firefox does not use Windows' underlying security stack. It brings along its own. But Chrome does run on top of the Windows security protocol. So if Microsoft had done something to Windows, Chrome would be affected, Firefox would not be. So once I understood what was going on, I immediately disabled what had proven itself to be a not yet ready for prime time protocol handshake feature, rebooted my machine, though some reports suggest it isn't necessary to reboot, and DigiKey site popped up on Chrome with no problem. So Bleeping Computer, which is where it's the only place I saw this noted, like in reading everything over the last couple of weeks. So hats off to them. They said in their note, Microsoft has acknowledged a new issue affecting several Windows versions, and which is, yes, everything currently being updated, meaning 7 through 10 inclusive, that Microsoft says, or Bleeping Computer reports of Microsoft, could lead to transport layer security and secure sockets layer connections intermittently failing or getting timed out. And in my experience, never getting made in the first place. They said this bug is caused by the security-related enforcement for the, and then we have a CVE, it's 2019-13-18 TLS spoofing vulnerability, which leads to Windows devices experiencing failures and timeouts during TLS DHE .star, essentially. That's all of the TLS cipher suites involving ephemeral Diffie-Hellman, which is what the DHE, Diffie-Hellman ephemeral, DHE stands for. This happens only when the devices are trying to make TLS connections to devices without support for the extended master secret. That's the EMS extension. So what Microsoft wrote was connections between two devices running any supported version of Windows should not have this issue when fully updated. In other words, says Microsoft, as long as you have Windows, fully updated Windows at each end, at the client and the server, well, what's the problem?
Okay, that'll solve the problem for everyone, won't it?
Earth to Microsoft, newsflash. Not everyone is using your Windows operating systems at each end of the connection on the internet, especially not on the server end, where IIS has been steadily losing steam and market share to Nginx, Cloudflare, and other providers through the recent years. So Microsoft's notice of this is headlined, quote, transport layer security, TLS in parens, connections might intermittently fail or time out when connecting. Yeah. And so I've got a link in the show notes to their notice. Fortunately, there is a registry tweak which can end this trouble by re-disabling Windows' new and apparently misguided enforcement of this extended master secret handshake. I have a picture that I took of my screenshot of Registry Editor where I added 2 keys. You add 2 keys under, and I'm not going to try to go over it in detail, but they're easy to add for anyone who's comfortable playing with a registry, as most veteran Windows users have had to learn to be. It's under computer, H key local machine, system, current control set, control, and then security providers. Under security providers is S channel in all caps. And there you add 2 D words, 2 32-bit D words for disable client extended master secret and disable server extended master secret. And you set those D words to 1, and that turns off Windows failing attempts to negotiate an extended master secret with the other end that doesn't know about that. And incredibly, Windows refuses the connection if it cannot obtain this extended master secret negotiation. So I just wanted to give everyone a heads up. I mean, my pain is over thanks to having stumbled upon this. So a huge and profound thank you to Bleeping Computer for pointing this out. And who knows how long I and doubtless many others would have been stuck without Chrome working on sites that would fail what is now an enforced handshake over on the client side and presumably over on the server side, since there are options to disable either the initiator of the connection, thus the client, or the acceptor of the connection initiated by a client, so on the server side. So again, it must be the case that Microsoft realizes, whoops, this is not what we wanted to have happen, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if next Tuesday we don't have this problem resolved at their end. But if anybody else has been beset by this, I mean, it's so the protection would be nice to have. This does solve a connection interception, man-in-the-middle spoofing problem, which TLS can have with the ephemeral Diffie-Hellman key agreement negotiation. So it would be nice to have it, but despite the fact that this has been in the spec for at least 4 years, I saw references to 2015 around. I didn't bother to go into big detail, but it's one of those things where, yeah, it'd be nice to have it, but it sure needs to to fail gracefully. And again, I had a lot of stuff to cover for the podcast as I was obvious at the beginning of the show. So I didn't spend time digging into this. One of the problems with man-in-the-middle spoofing attack protections is they tend to be subject to downgrade attacks, meaning that the man-in-the-middle can, if they're since they're able to intercept the connection as part of the attack anyway, they're able to say, oh, we don't support extended master secret. Sorry, which is to say that if the endpoints allowed extended master secret to be soft supported, which is to say only supported when each endpoint agreed, then the first thing a man-in-the-middle attacker would do is claim not to support it, thus disabling it. So it does make sense that Microsoft wants to force its enforcement, but it's breaking the internet. So unfortunately, we're not ready for its enforcement. So I don't know what's going to happen, but because Microsoft tried to bring it up and it broke a bunch of things for me, and I can't be alone in this. So as I said, it'll be interesting to see what happens next week. And Microsoft knows they did this. They've got, their advice is, oh, well, update Windows at each end. It's like, I don't, no, that's just not practical.
Yeah,
sorry about that.
Not always an opportunity. Not always an option.
Hello. So, and less of an option moving forward as the world leaves IIS as the web server platform of choice. So it doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. And I was curious too, because I did go back to SSL Labs. I remembered that they showed what the server the DigiKey had identified itself as using was, and now I don't remember, but it was some cloud provider web hosting platform thing. So it wasn't like Nginx. It was something that, maybe there isn't that large a market share, and so not that many servers are now in a position where they don't support it. But I couldn't get to a website that I want to get to using Chrome, so that's not okay. So anyway, I would imagine this will be of interest to some of our listeners, so hope so. Sure. And speaking of Chrome and 77 and 78, 78 is just out, and several things have been fixed. One is that the thing they did last week with Chrome 77, which turned out to have a problem with Symantec, which was because they were enforcing Microsoft's Windows Defender code integrity checking, which would prevent things not signed by Microsoft from being loaded into the Chrome process, the Chrome renderer. That turned out to break systems that were using Symantec's endpoint protection. But it turned out that there were more things that it broke, not just endpoint protection, but also users were getting the snap crashes if they used PC-Matic, which is that cheesy advertised on late night TV, AV, but also Palo Alto Networks traps security products, as well as something known as the Print Audit Infinite tool, which I've never heard of, but apparently it's used for tracking document printing on LANs. So it wasn't just Symantec, there were other apps which were also broken by this. So, which is to say, for some reason, these things were injecting their code into Chrome's process. And this code integrity checking allows Chrome to defend itself against that code injection. And that's good for everybody. We want that to be on, but Google has decided to turn it off. And so with Chrome 78, it is off. They have said, however, that they intend to turn it back on in the middle of this month. So those companies that have been alerted to the fact that their solutions are not compatible with code integrity checking, need to figure out how to fix that. Apparently, it's possible because we know that if you update to the newer version, the current version of Symantec's endpoint protection, then this doesn't cause that problem. So I guess this was probably necessary to clearly inform the companies that needed to that they got to get their act together, or their users are going to be uninstalling their programs from their computers, which are causing Chrome to break. And I imagine that Google would win this battle of incompatibility rather than the Print Audit Infinite tool and PC-Matic. Anyway, so that has happened. Also, last Thursday on Halloween, which was when Google released Chrome, it's 78.0.3904.87. And when I saw that, I checked, and that's the one I had. Not only to backpedal on, as I said, that enforcement of this code integrity checking, but every bit as urgently to patch a new Chrome 0 day, which they had just been informed of by Kaspersky, and it was being exploited in the wild. I have a link to the Google blog.com information about this. They said the stable channel has just been updated to 78.0.3904.87 for Windows, Mac, and Linux, which will roll out over the coming days and weeks, hopefully days. They said, note, access to bug details and links may be kept restricted until a majority of users are updated with a fix. We will also retain restrictions if the bug exists in a third-party library that other projects similarly depend upon but haven't yet fixed. This update includes 2 security fixes. They said, below, we highlight fixes that were contributed by external researchers. Please see the Chrome security page for more information. So there are 2 updates. The second one was the one that was sent to them by the guys at Kaspersky Labs. And to Google's credit, they received the information on Halloween, and they had 78 pushed out or available in the stable channel that same day. So they understood this was important, and they fixed it. They fixed it immediately. Kaspersky's disclosure, although Kaspersky pulls back, of course, from describing the details, Kaspersky's disclosure did have some wonderfully juicy details. They said Kaspersky's exploit prevention is a component part of Kaspersky products that has successfully detected a number of zero-day attacks in the past. And, of course, we've talked about those. Recently, it caught a new unknown exploit for Google's Chrome browser. They said, we promptly reported this to the Google Chrome security team. After reviewing the proof of concept we provided, Google confirmed there was a zero-day vulnerability and assigned it CVE 2019-13720. Google has released Chrome version 17.0.3904.87 for Windows, Mac, and Linux, and we recommend all Chrome users update to this latest version as soon as possible. And as it happens, I had fired up Chrome at the beginning of the work on the podcast yesterday, and it wasn't until I went to help about that gave Chrome a little kick in the butt in the pants to update itself. I was on 77 still, despite having just launched it. So it's worth making sure the next time you launch Chrome that you've got 78. At this point, it's very targeted. It's unlikely that people who are not, I'm trying to think where it was. Anyway, I'll get to it in a second. But it looked like it was only a watering hole attack affecting a limited number of people. But it was an unknown 0 day at the time, so nice that Kaspersky caught it. They said, we're calling these attacks Operation Wizard Opium. They said, so far, we've been unable to establish a definitive link with any known threat actors. There are certain very weak code similarities with Lazarus attacks, although these could very well be a false flag. The profile of the targeted website is more in line with earlier dark hotel attacks that have recently deployed similar false flag attacks. So, these guys are at the top of their game. They said more details about this and recent false flag attacks are available to customers of Kaspersky Intelligence Reporting. For more information, contact intelreports@kaspersky.com. But the tech details, they said the attack leverages a watering hole style injection on a Korean language news portal. Okay, that's what I meant when I said rather targeted. Unless you happen to be visiting Korean language news portals. Now, we don't know that's the only place this is being used. This is where they found it. They said a malicious JavaScript code was inserted in the main page, which in turn loads a profiling script from a remote site. The main index page hosted a small JavaScript tag that loaded a remote script from, and then it's at code.jquery.cdn.behindcorona.com site. The script then loads another script named .charlie. And then they redacted the .js. This JavaScript checks if the victim system can be infected by performing a comparison with the browser's user agent, which should run on any 64-bit version of Windows and not be a WoW64 process, meaning a 32-bit process running on a 64-bit OS. It also tries to get the browser's name and version. The vulnerability tries to exploit the bug in Google Chrome browser, and the script checks if the version is greater or equal to 65. The current Chrome version, of course, as we know, is now 78, which is immune to this. If the browser version checks out, the script starts performing a number of AJAX requests to the browser's controlled server behindcorona.com, where a path name points to the argument that is passed to the script xxxxx.php. Again, they redacted. The first request is necessary to obtain some information important for further use. This information includes several hex-encoded strings that tell the script how many chunks of the actual exploit code should be downloaded from the server, as well as a URL to the image file that embeds a key for the final payload and the RC4 key to decrypt these chunks of exploit code. After downloading all the chunks, the RC4 script decrypts and concatenates all the parts together, which gives the attacker a new JavaScript code containing the full browser exploit. So these guys went through, they jumped through serious hoops in order to obscure and encrypt and protect from observation the JavaScript code for the exploit. So remember, this thing is checking from Chrome 65, which presumably is where this problem began, up, anything greater than 65 at the time. So that suggests this thing has been around and has been effective for some period of time. The analysis, they wrote, we have provided here is deliberately brief due to vulnerability disclosure principles. In other words, they don't want to give this away while browsers are still in the wild that could be affected by this. They said the exploit used a race condition bug between two threads due to missing proper synchronization between them. It gives an attacker a use after free condition that is very dangerous because it can lead to remote execution scenarios, which is exactly what happens in our case, Kaspersky wrote. The exploit first tries to trigger the use after free to perform an information leak about important 64-bit addresses. So that's probably, as we know, address space layout randomization deobfuscation. They said this results in a few things. If an address is leaked successfully, it means the exploit is working correctly. A leaked address is used to know where the heap and stack is located, and that defeats the address space layout randomization, ASLR technique. And 3, a few other useful pointers for further exploitation are then locatable by searching near this address. After that, it tries to create a bunch of large objects using a recursive function. This is done to make some deterministic heap layout. We've seen that before, heap grooming, called grooming the heap, which is important for successful exploitation. At the same time, it attempts to utilize a heap spray technique that tries to reuse the same pointer that was freed earlier in the use after free part. This trick could be used to cause confusion and give the attacker the ability to operate on 2 different objects from a JavaScript code perspective, though in reality, they're located in the same memory region. The exploit attempts to perform numerous operations to allocate and free memory, along with other techniques that eventually give the attackers an arbitrary read-write primitive. This is used to craft a special object that can be used with WebAssembly and FileReader together to perform code execution for the embedded shellcode payload. After decryption, the malware module is dropped as update.exe, actually is updata, updata.exe to disk and executed. For persistence, the malware installs tasks in Windows Task Scheduler. That's a common means of getting something to run when the system boots or the user logs on. So, in short, from a user standpoint, with Chrome before 78 and presumably back to 65, if a person were to visit a website and without them doing anything or knowing anything, their Chrome browser would download, install, and run a native application on that Windows machine, which is to say this is as bad as it gets. We don't know how long this has been in the wild. We know apparently it's been effective since Chrome 65, and it's clear. I wanted to give our listeners a good sense for how much industry went into the creation of this. This was an expensive exploit to deploy. It is effective against the world's #1 browser on the internet, which we now know Chrome is, and it's very clear that anyone going to that particular news portal with Chrome of the appropriate versions, and Chrome is updating itself all the time, so nobody would have had an older one, and that is until they update to 78, would get themselves infected. So, bravo for Google fixing this immediately. Thread synchronization problems are among the most difficult problems to fix. All the code is working, everything's fine. The fact that they were blasting the heap and stack with allocations suggests that they were trying to obtain a pointer that would function with JavaScript still able to access the region of memory. So they would have a means of writing to memory through JavaScript and then getting execution of that memory through essentially an outside of JavaScript pointer. So, wow. Again, as I said, this kind of synchronization problem they are among the most difficult problems to find. They are very subtle. So first of all, somebody had to find this. Then they clearly put together a heavy-duty campaign in order to leverage this into remote code execution, and then set this up on some site. You could use your imagination. Who would want to be installing malware into visitors of Korean news portals? So, wow, that's where we are today.
But at least you convinced me to use Firefox, so it doesn't matter anymore, right?
Very good point. Yes. And maybe some of us haven't been able to use Chrome, and,
right.
Thanks to what Microsoft did to Windows last month.
Right, exactly. All the signs are pointing away.
Yeah, that's right. Jason, I think it's time for our second break, and then we're going to continue with lots of news.
Yes, The Edge. What did you call the segment? The On the Edge? Or
News from the Edge.
News from the Edge coming up next.
News from the Edge.
Dun, dun, dun. We'll need to get like a bumper made. That should be easy. We'll do that while we take this break. This episode of Security Now is brought to you by LastPass. LastPass is you know what LastPass is at this point. We talk about LastPass all the time because we love LastPass. LastPass is an award-winning security solution. Helps millions of individuals and over 43,000 organizations navigate their online lives easily and securely. And I mean, let's be real, you're probably accessing different password-protected accounts all over the place from a multitude of devices, your smartphone to your smartwatch to your laptop. With the LastPass mobile app, you can continue to have the safety and security of logging in anytime, anywhere, and you still only need one master password. Your LastPass account is backed up and synced across all of your devices for access to your passwords, no matter where you happen to be or what you happen to be using to connect to the internet. All you do is download the LastPass Password Manager from the App Store on your device, log in with the same LastPass account to sync your data to your smartphone. I have it on my Android device. I use it all the time. The autofill feature on mobile devices actually removes the hassle of typing on small mobile keyboards. It kind of used to be the case where you'd have to manually copy and then paste it into fields. Now that autofill feature just takes away that friction, so it does it automatically for you. It's awesome. And then you'll swipe into the LastPass app with your fingerprint for easy, secure access to your passwords. So you've got safety and security always. I should also mention, like I've got the Pixel 4 with the Face Unlock, and I know at least on the Pixel 4, it replaces the fingerprint security with the face scanning. And so it's this easy process of entering the password. You tap on the field, it pulls up the authentication, but because it's your face, it's already scanning. It goes beep, you're done, and it autofills it for you. We use LastPass Enterprise here at Twit. It's because we love LastPass and the convenience that it affords us. Obviously, as a business, because we all have a bit different business accounts that we need to access, and so it makes that easy. But then, personally, I've been using LastPass for years for my own personal use. Got my wife on board. It improves how you navigate the web because you're just practicing safer password habits by using LastPass and having very unique passwords on every site that you visit, passwords that you can't just recite off the top of your head. Thankfully, you don't have to worry about it because LastPass manages all that for you. LastPass also has an expanded business lineup with some amazing features that will improve security across your company and make life easier for your users. So check it out for yourself. Visit lastpass.com/twit, and you can find out how they can help you. That's lastpass.com/twit. And we thank LastPass for being so awesome and for supporting Security Now. All right, it's time we step over the edge into this next segment. So, just a note to our listeners: this is not a big piece of news, but I wanted to put it on everyone's radar. The preview build for the new Chromium-based Microsoft Edge stable version
has been released on the Edge Insider site. This is the preview of the Edge browser that will be made widely available in January. Yesterday, as part of the kickoff at the start of Microsoft's 5-day Ignite 2019 conference, the announcement was made that Microsoft Edge will become generally available and fully released, that is to say the Chromium-based version, middle of January, on January 15th. And so with this, what's interesting is with this preview release, Microsoft Edge Stable will be at version 79.0.309.7, which actually puts it one major version ahead of where Google's Chrome current stable version is. As we know, it's at 78. But on the other hand, Chrome will be past that point, especially if they rev Chrome in the middle of this month in order to turn code integrity checking back on for probably Chrome 79. So we expect them to do that. So from an academic curiosity standpoint, it's going to be very interesting, I think, Jason, to see how the world settles out with a version of Edge that's internally identical to Chrome. You know, same. I mean, they'll both be Chromium. Yep. They'll be from different companies. They'll have different UI Chrome. But so will Edge take some of Chrome's market share? Will anyone know or care what's under the hood of their browser? I don't think they do now.
I don't think they do now, yeah.
No. So, you know, I guess that makes me wonder what's been moving people away from Edge in the first place. I have no idea, but it's going to be interesting to see how this develops. In general, you know, I applaud this move by Microsoft. It must have been so difficult to discard all of the work that was done on their brand new, very own new browser that replaced the old creaky IE engine. That was the Chakra core. But this clearly was the sanest choice. Why run independent projects for something that has become a commodity? This makes sense. But, you know, do you think that people with using Windows 10 with Edge, I mean, they must be using Chrome. I mean, they must be downloading Chrome and choosing to use it instead of Edge for some reason.
I mean, maybe that's just a force of habit. If they already happen to have, you know, all their Google accounts, Chrome makes it really, really appealing from the perspective of syncing all of your information, having that be another data point into your Google account. So yeah, I don't know either. I'm also admittedly not really much of a Windows user, so I don't know through experience what that would be like. I know that if I ended up on a Windows browser, like my habit would be to pull up, to download the Chrome browser because it logs into the Google accounts and because that's just where I have all my data flowing through anyways.
Yeah, I think that must be it. And of course, if you are a user of Google search, Google is actively promoting Chrome. It's like, are you ready to switch? Why haven't you switched yet? Let's switch you right now. Wouldn't switching be a good idea? It's faster. It's more stable. It's Google.
It's what you want.
I'm sure that people are like, I don't want to use this stinky old Microsoft thing that works just fine. Yeah. I want the shiny Google version.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah. So we are 2 years downstream from our first encounter with microarchitectural data sampling vulnerabilities. That's the fancy roll-up catch-all classification name that groups together all of those side channel attacks on Intel and to a lesser but still significant degree AMD and other processors, which, as we know, started coming to light right from the start of 2018. I mean, it was podcast 1 of January 2018 that was about Spectre and Meltdown, which puts it nearly 2 years ago. We had, as we know, we first had Meltdown and then Spectre, and then they were followed by a few variants and extensions of them Then we were hit with port smash, then zombie load, then Riddle, and then more recently Fallout. So there's been a bunch. And of course, these are distinctive from the DRAM hammering attacks, which have been demonstrated to be effective in the wild. So here we are, though, nearly 2 years downstream of all that, and one glaring aspect remains true, which is despite there never having ever been any sign of any of these theoretical processor failings being leveraged into a practical attack, we have all, nevertheless, sacrificed around 20% of our previous system performance in order to prevent these attacks that have never materialized. So, of course, we can't prove a negative. There's no way to know whether, if the industry had not responded as affirmatively as it collectively did, we would have eventually discovered these problems in the wild, and we'll likely never know. Hopefully, Intel has learned a lot from all of this. What they've done so far and what we've done, what they've done with microcode patches and what the OS industry has done by implementing kernel-level embracement of those patches is to, as has been noted by people who have been doing benchmarks, it's now felt that we're paying about a 20% performance price penalty for this, just because we've turned off things that were all about optimizations at the microarchitecture, which it turned out were not safe. So at this point, what we know is that Intel now has a profound understanding of these problems. I mean, and remember, there was some mention of this theoretical possibility early on, which people just sort of ignored because we were ignoring all kinds of things in the early days, which we now soberly understand we cannot afford to ignore any longer. So Intel knows what the problem is. We know that their processor design pipeline is very long and deep, which is to say that, they start on a design years before it is in consumer silicon. So it's certainly the case that they immediately scrapped the designs as far back as they could, or as close as they could, and are bringing a whole new architecture out. But it's going to be, years until we see those. Probably at that time, we will get everything we want. We will recover the performance that we've lost. We will have designs which are now fully aware of these problems and have new workarounds and probably a whole bunch of new patents filed by Intel and other processor manufacturers about how to not be susceptible to these microarchitectural data sampling problems while still developing for us the kind of performance that we were liking to become accustomed to. With any luck, we'll have some new chips in a few years that are fast and safe, both. Okay, so QNAP. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I know from many instances of feedback I've seen after the podcast about the file synchronization solutions that I found, that many of our listeners are very happy users of their QNAP brand of network-attached storage devices. So I wanted to make sure that they and everyone were aware of the fact that many thousands of QNAP NAS devices are currently infected with malware which has been named QSnatch. Over 7,000 infections have been reported in Germany alone, and the malware is still spreading. Thousands more, many thousands more, are believed to be infected worldwide in what appears to be an ongoing outbreak. And thank you. On the screen right now is a map of known QNAP NAS device infections. Clearly, Germany is is buried, but so are the coasts. It doesn't look like there are many QNAP NASs in the more rustic regions of the U.S., but boy, in the Pacific Northwest and in Southern California, California in general, it's
blanketed.
A lot of problems.
Saturated.
Yeah, blanketed. Thank you. Perfect word. And also on the Northeast is also just, you can't see the country underneath that cloud cover. So information on how QSnatch works is still scant. The only report comes from the National Security Center in Finland, which was the first cybersecurity organization to spot the malware just last week. NCSC-FI, that's the Finland members, have not yet discovered how this new threat spreads and infects QNAP NAS systems. However, once it gains access to a device, QSnatch burrows into the firmware to gain reboot persistence. So an analysis of the malware's code revealed the following capabilities. We know that it modifies OS-timed jobs and scripts, so cron job and init scripts. It prevents future firmware updates by overriding update source URLs. So it prevents the machine from updating itself. It prevents the native QNAP malware remover app from running. It extracts and steals usernames and passwords for all NAS users. So these features, while describing the malware's capabilities, don't reveal its intent. So it's unclear if QSnatch was developed to carry out DDoS attacks, to perform cryptocurrency mining, or maybe just as a way to backdoor QNAP devices to steal sensitive files or host malware payloads for future operations. We don't know yet. One theory is that QSnatch operators are currently in the phase where they're building their botnet and will deploy other modules to it in the future. The analysts confirmed that QSnatch has the ability to connect to a remote command and control server to download and then run additional modules. So this is definitely something you want out of your QNAP NAS if you're unlucky enough to have had it infected. And based on the patterns we're seeing, it looks like Europe is buried, and so is the U.S. wherever these things are. So for the time being, the only confirmed method of removing QSnatch has been performing a full factory reset of the NAS device. After performing a factory reset, users should install the latest QNAP NAS firmware update, which was last Friday, November 1st. QNAP released a firmware update which incorporates specific QSnatch protections. So the QNAP themselves know what the problem is. They've got a firmware update. I don't own a QNAP device. I bought a Drobo device back when Drobo was a sponsor of the show, and I have them at 2 locations, as our listeners know. So I can't speak to whether the NASs would automatically update, but could if they haven't yet been infected. What we do know is that infections are aplenty, as that map showed, and once infected, your QNAP will no longer update itself. So I would recommend a manual factory restore and then update. And because anybody who has a QNAP device will want to be current, and you're going to have to make sure, apparently by manual means, that you get any existing infection scraped out of your machine. Once you've done that, you'll want to change all passwords for all accounts on the device, since they may have been compromised. Remove any unknown user accounts from the device. Make sure that the firmware, of course, is up to date. And also that your apps are up to date. Remove anything you don't recognize, any unknown or unused apps, just as general proper behavior, you would want to do that. Also, install the QNAP malware remover application through the App Center functionality. And finally, set an access control list for the device so that you have, you've locked this thing down. Note also that we'll note that QSnatch is the 4th malware strain spotted this year that has targeted NAS devices. There was a ransomware strain that was impacting Synology devices, and there were 2 previous ransomware strains that were infecting QNAP devices. So QNAP has had 2 previous encounters this year. It really is clear if you've got your QNAP device exposed to the internet. And I should have started by mentioning that also. I mean, from what our listeners were saying, it looks like they appreciate the functionality of having their NAS, their QNAP NAS, on the net. That is, with a public-facing interface that allows them to access it remotely. That's the danger, of course. If your QNAP is only on your LAN and is not exposed to the public internet, then you never had a problem. You're not one of those glowing orange circles on the map that we showed. But for what it's worth, I know that a lot of our users are using these things. Just take some time as soon as you can to make sure that you have not been infected, and do make sure that you update to the latest firmware. Because this thing looks like it's serious, and we don't know what it's going to do next.
Yeah, sounds ugly.
Yeah. I mentioned at the top of the show, just sort of I wanted to put this on people's radar. And that is, we now have a report from Armor, the folks that have been watching and really doing a lot of forensics works on ransomware delivery. They now have positively identified at least 13 managed service providers who've been positively identified as being the means for having pushed ransomware out to their client companies. The managed service provider functions as essentially a large access hub for the ransomware. And once hackers compromise an MSP's network, they then use its remote access tools to deploy ransomware to often hundreds of companies, and that means thousands of computers. I have a link to the report in the show notes for anyone who's interested in the details. And I'm not going to go through an enumeration of this, but we've referred to Armor in the past. This report adds 6 new identified managed service providers and cloud-based service providers to the existing list that they had already known of, which brings the total of publicly identified MSPs and cloud-based service providers of just during 2019 to a total of 13. Chris Hinckley, the head of Armor's Threat Resistance Unit, said this uptake in successful ransomware attacks against MSPs and cloud-based service providers, he said, is a harsh reminder that organizations need to ensure that the third-party vendors they do business with are as equally protected against current and emerging cyber threats as they are. This is especially true because, as we've seen, a successful ransomware attack against a single MSP or cloud-based service provider can be debilitating to all their customers, as well as to their own company, as the attack can quickly shut down key systems which the customers depend upon to run their organization. And of course, a ransomware attack against an MSP can be fatal, putting an MSP out of business, which appears to have happened with PM Consultants, which is an Oregon-based IT consulting and IT support provider to dental practices. We talked about the dental practices that got hit after PM Consultants was hit by ransomware in early July. They just gave up. They shut down their business later that month, saying that they were doing so in part due to a devastating event which had befallen their organization. And we know that their clients were all targets and victims of ransomware. So our takeaway here is that, and this is the point for our listeners that I think is important, any enterprise who is contracting for the services of any outside provider should give serious consideration to the sort of access that provider truly needs to have into their network. It's entirely natural for any provider to have a full trust in their own capabilities and their own security. And so they could, in full good conscience, ask for full and unfettered access into their clients' networks. And based on the infections we're seeing, that's apparently what they're being given. But any highly responsible IT manager who was on the receiving end of such an arrangement should give some serious consideration to exactly what sort of access the outside party needs, understanding that something entirely inadvertent on the other end could happen. And it's not possible to offer any like more concrete advice without knowing exactly what the relationship is and what form of access is really needed. But we're seeing this new pattern where managed service providers are targets because it allows the malware providers to essentially explode into their entire customer base and get a huge multiplicative benefit from a single infection. And so from my standpoint, it's a little bit like the firewalls of yesteryear and today. Initially, when you would hook your LAN to the internet, you would just hook your LAN to the internet. It's like, yay, we're a big friendly globe, right? Mm-hmm. Well, of course, not anymore, not any longer. Now, our firewalls are buttoned down tight. And in fact, we've talked about this before. Original firewalls were default open, and then they would block specific ports they didn't want to give bad guys access to. There is a single firewall around now that uses that logic.
It's the opposite now.
Yes, they are locked down. Yep. They are default closed, and then you punch little holes, hopefully little pinpricks through the firewall, only to allow a trickle of traffic, in the best case, from specific other sites and IPs that you want to trust rather than everybody. A website, of course, doesn't have that luxury. They typically need to be open to the world. But so if you have a relationship with a managed service provider, even allowing access from only their IP, that's not going to help you in this case because it's their IP that will be downloading malware onto your network. You really need to look at the kind of access they need so that they're just not given carte blanche remote control and full download software download capability into your network. Again, without knowing in detail what's going on at like the nature of the service being provided, it's impossible to be more clear. But really, I would urge enterprises that have relationships with third parties to look at what would happen if the third party were controlled by malicious agencies, because that's happening. And they represent a high value target. Bad guys are going to work hard to get them to get a managed service provider infected. And you don't want your MSPs, any of your MSPs, to be hosts of ransomware. So just to add that caution to everyone's radar.
I love this next story, by the way.
Oh my God, yes. It's such a great story. So 5 months after returning his rental car, the brief renter of the car still has full remote control. He can track the vehicle remotely, lock and unlock it, and start and stop its engine. So the story is that when Masamba Sinclair rented a Ford Expedition from Enterprise last May, he was excited to connect it to connect with its Fordpass. The Fordpass app allows drivers to use their phones to remotely start and stop the engine, lock and unlock the doors, and track the vehicle's precise location. What could possibly go wrong? So he's 34 years old, and he told the people, I think it was ours who was doing the reporting on this, he said, I enjoyed it and logged into Fordpass to be able to access vehicle features from my phone, such as locking and unlocking and starting the engine. I liked the idea of it more than I found it useful. He says, the UI looks good and works well. So today, Sinclair's opinion of mobile apps and rental cars is decidedly less favorable. That's because 5 months after he returned the vehicle on May 31st, his app continues to have control over the car, despite multiple other people having since rented the SUV in the intervening months. Fordpass still allows Sinclair to track the location of the vehicle, lock and unlock it, start and stop its engine. Sinclair has brought the matter to Ford's attention, both through its website and multiple times on Twitter. So far, Ford has done nothing to end his access. He said, all it took for me to initially connect was to download the app and enter the VIN, that's, the VIN number on the engine. Then, he says, then confirming connectivity through the infotainment system. There might be a way to disassociate my phone from the car itself, he says, but that hasn't happened yet. And it's crazy to put the onus on renters to have to do that anyway. He says, I have had no problems at all and have even unlocked the doors and started the engine when I could see that the vehicle was at the Missoula Airport rental parking lot. Wow. So we have in the show notes 3 of his tweets. The first on June 4th, he says to @Ford, he says, I can still track and unlock the Expedition that I rented last week via the Fordpass app. Huge safety concern for all future renters. I submitted a solution via Ford New Ideas. Yeah, there's a new idea to solve this, and it was denied. This needs to be fixed, he has in all caps, and then he posts a pic. The next day, he tweets, it's day 5 since I returned my rental, and now someone else has rented it out. Do I need to start remotely unlocking it until they also start to complain? Please fix this! ! And looks like a week later, June 14th, I returned this car, he's tweeting to Ford, I returned this car 2 weeks ago, and you've shown no willingness to allow rental companies to remove my access to unlock it and start the engine. Maybe I'll just start randomly unlocking it. Hopefully he doesn't.
Hopefully, yeah,
Anyway.
don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Fordpass is offered, as we know, by the Ford Motor Company and is available for both iOS and Android devices. It's one of several apps for connecting to Ford vehicles. The less than intuitive means for unpairing a vehicle and phone, not to mention the difficulty in knowing a device remains connected, represents a serious security and privacy risk, not to mention to renters, but to people buying a vehicle secondhand. Imagine you buy it, from CarMax or something and don't know or particularly care that the previous owner still has access. While Ford said infotainment screens will indicate when a device is paired, it's obvious that multiple enterprise employees and renters, this is 6 months ago.
Yep.
Multiple enterprise employees and renters have continued to miss the warning. Even now, after the reporter of this discussed the problem with both enterprise and Ford representatives, Sinclair's access still has not been revoked. Sinclair said, "I've been opening the app and tracking the vehicle almost every day to see if my access is still there. And sure enough, I can see exactly where my old rental, affectionately named the Beast," he wrote, "is at any given moment. This means that I can not only find this rental car whenever I want, but I can also unlock the doors and help myself to anything that might be inside. Since proximity," and this is me thinking now, "since proximity to the infotainment system was required initially to complete the initial pairing, authorization, and authentication, and since occasional proximity would be an expected characteristic for any actual car owner, it would seem to me that a useful security trade-off would be to have a device be forgotten if it hasn't been within physical proximity of the vehicle's infotainment system for, I don't know, a week or two? I mean, it sounds like repairing isn't that burdensome. And, a car owner, they're going to be in their car every day.
Right.
Or, maybe they only drive it on the weekends. Okay, so make it 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, forget the thing. Or maybe after 1 week, flash a warning and say, this device has not been near the car for the last week. Please confirm you want to keep it paired. So make it an affirmative statement of pairing endurance. And if you don't do that, it unpairs. I mean, it's nuts.
Yeah, I'm curious about this Fordpass thing because this actually reminds me of like a question I've had when I do rent a car and they have the infotainment system and I want to play my music through the Bluetooth. So that requires pairing. So then as a renter, you end up pairing to this thing and maybe you choose not to share your contacts with the system. I usually don't do that, don't share the contacts because that seems like a really bad idea. But I'm sure a lot of people just say, yeah, whatever, connect it, and then they don't think to remove it. So, I mean, and I guess there should be some sort of mode in these things for rental car agencies for them to, on their turnaround. Because even what you're talking about, Steve, if somebody rents it the very next day, that still doesn't prevent this other third party from locking the door or turning off the vehicle at the wrong time or whatever. It's a liability. There needs to be some easy way for them to be able to deactivate that if that doesn't exist already. Maybe it does, and they're just not using it. I don't know.
Well, or in the rental mode, it would be reasonable to turn down the forget the device delay to 1 day.
Right.
Because, anyone who's renting a car is in it, a lot.
Yep.
So, and if not, boo-hoo, if your device, besides, who wants to unlock their doors remotely? Okay, maybe. Who wants to start the engine remotely?
Maybe
okay,
it's cold outside. I can understand that one, maybe.
These are all like gee whiz doohickey.
Yeah,
I have it
not necessity.
because I'm on the internet.
Right.
My car is an IoT. Well, we already know what a bad idea that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting that it's taken this long and still nothing.
Wow. Yeah.
Just seems like the wires are crossed on that one, because I would imagine if the right person at Ford knew of that.
The wires are short circuited, Jason. There's no question.
Yep. Indeed.
So Chinese-made drones in the U.S. are being grounded. I have no way of independently assessing the danger that foreign-made drones could pose to U.S. domestic security. But they are flying everywhere, and they are essentially flying video cameras. And they're connected to the internet, and they're sending data back to China. So what's in the news is that pending a security review of these Chinese-made drones, the U.S. Department of the Interior, the DOI, announced last Wednesday that it is grounding all Chinese-made drones and drones with Chinese-made parts until it reviews its drone program. And the Department of the Interior turns out to have quite a program. But because it's simply not practical, that decision does not apply to drones, quote, currently being utilized for emergency purposes, such as fighting wildfires, search and rescue, and dealing with natural disasters that may threaten life or property. So in recent years, the Department of the Interior has enthusiastically embraced drones, publicizing the wide variety of ways it has deployed them. In addition to being deployed for emergency rescues and disaster monitoring, which I think is a cool application, they're used in more expansive long-term projects such as geological surveys and wildlife population monitoring. According to a 2018 report about its use of drones, the department owned at the time 531 drones and conducted more than 10,000 flights across 42 states and territories. Okay, so 365 days in a year, that's 3 a day. So, I mean, they're in use. Other more recent reports, 30 a day. I dropped the digit. Yes, 10,000 flights on 365 days. That's 30 a day. So, yeah. Other more recent reports have updated that number to 800 operating drones. So they since their report in 2018, they've purchased another nearly 300. The report did not specify what percentage of those drones were Chinese made. However, the most popular and capable drones we know are made by the Chinese company DJI. And in fact, 2 years ago, the U.S. Army discontinued the use of drones produced by DJI, who is the world's biggest manufacturer of drones, because of the risk of these vulnerabilities. And last May, the DHS, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, warned companies that Chinese-made drones could potentially transmit sensitive footage or data to third parties. And then last month, a bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced legislation that would bar all federal agencies from operating drones manufactured or assembled in China. Because the Interior Department uses drones to survey a variety of critical infrastructure, including mines and dams, as well as to study rapid response situations and emergency routes. And of course, we know that these things have GPS in them also so they know what their location is. The information they collect has at least some potential for abuse. So far, to date, scant public evidence exists that Chinese drones have been involved in any large-scale cyber espionage, or that they have backdoors built in that would allow them to be exploited for surveillance. For their part, DJI has pushed back and argued that opposition to its products is motivated primarily by political hostility toward Chinese companies. But we all know that just as with itty-bitty malicious chips hidden on motherboards, even if it isn't being done, it could be done. So I suppose I'm glad that at least a sober awareness of the risks exist and that they're being taken seriously. DJI has proposed assembling more of its drones in the United States, as well as offering a version of its devices called the Government Edition, with certain safeguards that would protect information captured and would prevent it from being transmitted wirelessly. So, just brainstorming a bit, what may develop would be a two-tier system where governments, which can afford to pay for more costly, audited, and known clean drones, will have that option. But, regular users like wedding photographers can save their money, since recording Jack and Jill's nuptials from a height is unlikely to be of great interest to foreign spies. And DJI could continue to make their lovely hardware, but allow an open source community to add the software if that isn't even being done. I know that there are a lot of drones that have been reverse engineered from a hardware standpoint, and where there is now third-party open source software. So, it just means, let's get responsible here as, government purchasing agents. If DJI wanted to salvage their reputation, Jason, they could just, make it official, allow the government to take their lovely hardware and put their own firmware in it so they know exactly what it's doing, not make it a closed black box, or in this case, a cream-colored, four-armed shape.
With deadly propellers on top. Yes, yeah. Indeed.
Yeah, they are nice drones. Let's take our last break. Let's take our last break, and then we're going to talk about the controversy, the surprising amount of controversy over DNS-Over-HTTPS and the emergence of the long-awaited BlueKeep vulnerability exploit.
All right, we're going to get right into that after we thank the sponsor of Security Now, CacheFly. We love CacheFly here at Twit. CacheFly has been with us basically from the beginning. Give your users the seamless online experience that they want. You can power your site or app with CacheFly CDN like we do and be 30% faster than the competition. No matter what industry your business is in, if your website is directly tied to company revenue, you can give your customers the fast downloads that they need with CacheFly. CacheFly CDN delivers rich media content up to 10 times faster than traditional delivery methods and up to 30% faster than other major CDNs. So you know why we use them. They're backed by a 100% SLA. CacheFly guarantees the best user experience for all your customers, no matter where they are and what device they happen to be on. And as you know, everybody's on a million different devices nowadays. This CacheFly makes sure that they get the content that's just right for whatever they happen to be on. Join the thousands of others who trust CacheFly's reliable network, including LG, Microsoft, Adobe, and Ars Technica, just to name a few. And like I said, we've been hosting our podcasts on CacheFly since almost the beginning, audio and video, for around a decade now. Every month, our viewers and listeners download petabytes of data fast and flawlessly, and we just would not be the Twit that you know if we didn't have CacheFly at our side. So say goodbye to logging in multiple times a week, or worse, even daily, trying to track your CDN usage. No billing spikes. You get a custom plan tailored to your CDN needs based on yearly usage trends. And on average, customers who switch to CacheFly save more than 20%. And, 20% is considerable. You can imagine what you could do with that 20% and your time. And just for Twit listeners, CacheFly is giving away a complimentary detailed analysis of your current CDN bill and usage trends. You can see if you're overpaying 20% or more for CDN by checking this out. Learn more at securitynow.cashfly.com. That's securitynow.cashfly.com. And we thank CashFly for their support of Security Now. All right, let's get into the controversy here, Steve.
So, as I mentioned at the top of the show, DOH remains controversial, not so much with end users who appreciate the idea that their ISPs and others who might wish to snoop on and possibly filter and block their DNS lookups will be much less able to do so. But within the industry, where those who are being blinded to DNS lookups are crying foul and running around stirring up a bunch of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, it's sort of breathtaking how much kerfuffle there is. For example, last week, Motherboard carried a story with the headline, Comcast is lobbying against encryption that could prevent it from learning your browsing history.
I remember that.
Okay,
article.
that's what Motherboard is saying. Comcast is lobbying against encryption. That is to say, wants laws to prevent DNS encryption that would prevent it from obtaining its browser's history. The subhead reads, Motherboard has obtained a leaked presentation of internet service providers, which internet service providers are using to try to lobby lawmakers against a form of encrypted browsing data. They put that in there to simplify things. Mm-hmm. They said, so anyway, for our audience, let's remember that we previously covered here, Mozilla has indicated that it plans to have Firefox route its DOH queries to Cloudflare's servers. In response to the flack it's been getting, Mozilla has been explicit that, quote, no money is being exchanged to route DNS requests to Cloudflare, unquote, as part of their DNS-Over-HTTPS feature that's currently being gradually enabled for Firefox users in the U.S. For example, they further indicated that the only reason they chose Cloudflare is that they are being rigorous about the requirements, the privacy requirements, and the no profit from this data requirements of anyone that they point their Firefox data to. And as other DOH providers become willing to make the same pledge that Cloudflare has, then Firefox is happy to use those too. I mean, this is it's important to understand we're just at the beginning of this. Detractors have been saying that by using Cloudflare as the default DOH resolver for Firefox, Mozilla will help centralize a large chunk of DNS traffic on Cloudflare's service, and that is indeed the case. But let's also remember, as for Google, Google is planning to take a much more dynamic posture. We'd covered this previously. Google will have Chrome test the user's currently configured DNS server, and if that service also supports DOH, Chrome will switch over to using it. This is, I think, a slick solution, since Chrome users may have already manually switched their non-encrypted DNS to some other provider who offers superior value-added services for DNS that they want. So if that's the case, why not allow it to also be encrypted in addition to having those value-added services? So, okay, with that in mind, and Comcast knows all of this, let's look at what Comcast is alleging to lawmakers. Motherboard wrote, the plan, which Google intends to implement soon, would enforce the encryption of DNS data made using Chrome, meaning the sites you visit. Privacy advocates, writes Motherboard, have praised Google's move, but ISPs are pushing back as part of a wider lobbying effort against encrypted DNS, according to the presentation which motherboard obtained. Technologists and activists say this encryption would make it harder for ISPs to leverage data for things such as targeted advertising, as well as block some forms of censorship used by authoritarian regimes. Mozilla, they write, which makes Firefox, is also planning a version of this encryption. Marshall Irwin, Senior Director of Trust and Safety at Mozilla, told Motherboard in a phone call after reviewing sections of the Comcast slide deck that, quote, the slides overall are extremely misleading and inaccurate. And frankly, he said, I would be somewhat embarrassed if my team had provided that slide deck to policymakers. And he added, we're trying to essentially shift the power to collect and monetize people's data away from ISPs and providing users with control and a set of default protections. So they had one summary slide that I'll share that I'm just going to just read the headlines of the other slides. I think there were 17 total. So their summary that begins this says, Google has announced unilateral plans. That's in all bold. Unilateral plans, along with Mozilla, which derives over 90% of its revenue from Google. Now, I don't think that's true anymore. Remember that used to be the case, that Mozilla was, I think they defaulted to Google search. And we know that historically Mozilla had a relationship with Google, but I remember Leo telling me that ended years ago. So that seems, if that's correct, then wow, crazy to put that in there. Anyway, unilateral plans to activate DOH in its Chrome browser as soon as October. That is, now. Google also appears poised to activate DOT for devices using its Android mobile operating system in the near future. Of course, we covered that as well at the time. If activated, this feature would by default route all DNS traffic from Chrome and Android users to Google public DNS. Of course, that's not true. Thus, got a big bold chunk here, centralizing a majority of worldwide DNS data with Google. Okay, and then they said this charge would mark here we are in bold, fundamental shift in the decentralized nature of the Internet's architecture and give one provider control of Internet traffic routing and vast amounts of one provider control of Internet traffic routing. What? And vast amounts of new data about customers and competitors. Okay. Except that Chrome is like, there's like a list of 9 non-Google public DNS servers that they work with out of the box.
Don't say that. No one needs to know that.
Yeah.
There's
the
nothing
unilateral
to see here.
Centralization, of DNS raises serious policy issues relating to cybersecurity. That's bold. Privacy, antitrust. Oh, those are not bold. Oh, national security and law enforcement. Those are in bold. Network performance and service quality, including 5G and other areas. So, okay. In the presentation, Comcast paints this type of encryption as something that will fundamentally change the internet and will centralize power under Google. Comcast wrote in its presentation, the unilateral, this was in the slide that I just read. Okay, so I have a link to the PDF of the slide deck for anyone who really wants more pain. But here are the 11 titles of slides. The presentation itself is titled Google's Proposed Public DNS Plans. Slide 1, or one of 11, Google's unilateral imposition by default. Centralized DNS encryption will harm key components of the internet. Okay, slide 2. Google's plans will cause radical disruption. Oh, geez. Number 3, significant cybersecurity and national security risks. Okay, what? 4, privacy risks increase as a single firm amasses more consumer data. Wait, okay, more than Comcast getting their hands on it? Okay,
exactly.
let's remember that back in 2017, ISPs, including Comcast, aggressively lobbied Congress to make it possible to sell their users, their customers' browsing data without their consent or knowledge. Okay. 5, antitrust and competition concerns. Wait, how is DNS a competitive territory? It maps domain names to IPs. 6, law enforcement efforts may be compromised. Okay. 7, CDN localization will likely suffer and backbone costs will rise. Okay, now I would give them that one. CDNs do rely on localization. That is, it can be the case that the IP you obtain varies, but more often it's the CDN localization is performed at the router level and the IP you get never changes. So, sorry, number 7. Number 8, wireless performance, including 5G, will be undermined. No, it won't. 9, parental controls and content filtering may be disabled. Okay, yes, if the DNS provider you used was using DNS for parental control or content filtering, and you switch to a different DNS provider that doesn't offer that, then yeah, that will change. But if your DNS provider offers DOH, Chrome will detect that automatically and just encrypt your queries so that your ISP can't see them, but your service is not otherwise affected. 10, ISPs and other enterprise services may be disrupted or broken. What?
How?
ISPs and other enterprise services may be, well, okay, there is the issue of enterprises, but again, Chrome has already anticipated this and will not override non-public DNS queries, so enterprise services continue to be functional. And 11, the last one, Congress should demand the Google pause and answer key questions. So we really got to ask ourselves why Comcast apparently places so much value upon their access to their customers' DNS data. They've got their non-DNS data. They got all their data. Mm-hmm. So, wow, they really do seem to have their panties in a bunch over this thing.
That data is as valuable to them in their eyes as it is to Google or anyone else, I suppose.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
And now would be the time to strike as far as that's concerned.
Well, they're doing that.
Yeah, in many ways.
So, and speaking of, nice segue, Jason, time to strike. It took a long time, but the BlueKeep-based attacks have finally started. And what we predicted on this podcast has finally happened. The so-called BlueKeep vulnerability in Windows Remote Desktop is being exploited and, as we suspected, not by a worm. ZDNet's headline was, BlueKeep attacks are happening, but it's not a worm. Hackers are using BlueKeep to break into Windows systems and install a cryptocurrency miner. Also what we expected. The Hacker News says, first cyber attack, mass exploiting BlueKeep RDP flaw spotted in the wild. Threat post, BlueKeep attacks have arrived, are initially underwhelming. And bleeping computer, Windows BlueKeep RDP attacks are here, infecting with miners. So, some friends of ours are in the middle of this. Over the weekend and across the world, security researchers honeypots monitoring port 3389, which is the RDP port, 3389, which is where Windows listens for incoming remote desktop protocol connections, the honeypots began lighting up and crashing as attempts were being made to leverage the BlueKeep vulnerability for the purpose of running cryptocurrency miners. On Saturday, Kevin Beaumont noticed that multiple honeypots in his Eternal Pot RDP honeypot network started to crash and reboot. His pots have been active for almost a year, so they would have been scanned and cataloged by anyone who is planning an attack. And during all that time, this is the first time they came down. The first details about BlueKeep being the cause of these events came from our friend Marcus Hutchins, aka Malware Tech, who investigated the crash dumps from Kevin's machines. He said that he, quote, found BlueKeep artifacts in memory and shellcode to drop a Monero miner. According to Marcus's analysis, an initial payload runs an encoded PowerShell command that downloads a second PowerShell script, which is also encoded. Marcus says that the final payload is a cryptocurrency miner, likely Monero, currently detected by 25 out of 68 AV engines at VirusTotal. Marcus said that the malware may not be a worm, but that it is mass exploiting the BlueKeep bug. This indicates that the cybercriminals are using a BlueKeep scanner to find vulnerable systems exposed on the net and drop the cryptocurrency miner on them. And then a later update, Marcus said that analysis of its network traffic does not indicate self-propagation. So, the server doing the exploitation obtained its target IP addresses before the attack from a predefined list. This is what we expected, since the exploit is straightforward once its details have been worked out. And adding worm code just adds additional unnecessary complexity without returning any real value. Once upon a time, when the internet was a much more quiet place, a worm would have been launched as a means of obscuring the original attacker's origin. But on today's internet, where other machines are readily compromised and used to launch reflected attacks, hiding is far less necessary. The first public BlueKeep exploit added to Metasploit 2 months ago in September, or was added to Metasploit 2 months ago in September. And Marcus's analysis has confirmed that the same code which was present in the open source Metasploit module is also present in the malware. In other words, it looks very much as though whoever it was who was behind the attacks did not independently develop the attack, but is using publicly available code resources and did not develop, made no effort to turn it into a wormable threat, as Kevin's honeypot crash's success. It's not particularly reliable either, or it wouldn't be crashing these things. It would be installing itself. Kevin recently noted that there are presently more than 724,000 systems worldwide that are currently susceptible to BlueKeep exploitation. 750,000 machines now on the net. This thing got closed by Windows Update months ago. These systems just never update themselves. they've got RDP exposed and just waiting to get taken over. So anyway, BlueKeep has happened. It's going to be, Monero. Someone's going to be making money from Monero mining for them on all these machines that presumably no one is paying any attention to, because they're sure not updating them with any useful code updates.
There's just too much to pay attention to. Your show is always just so full of joy and jolly insight into just how safe the internet really is. We're always talking about millions and millions of vulnerable systems. It's very cheerful.
Get your tinfoil.
Steve, excellent stuff here, and always bringing so much knowledge on these topics. Really appreciate the work that you do, and keeping people safe, helping keep people safe. Anyways, you mentioned it earlier. We should mention it again. The Squirrel event is coming up Saturday, November 30th. And now just a few weeks away, because time is weird and going very fast. So November 30th, 2:15 p.m. Pacific. I'm not sure if there are any openings still for this. I think last I checked it was pretty full, but there were a couple of open spaces. So anyone who wants to sit in the studio for that recording is welcome to email tickets@twit.tv. And, only do that if you're like 100%, I will be there. I'll be sitting in the audience. That way someone else who could make it isn't, that opportunity isn't taken from them. So we definitely want to make sure that people who sign up to be here in attendance can actually make it. So if you can, tickets at twit.tv. That's Saturday, November 30th. 2:15 p.m. Pacific for the Squirrel event.
And I would just add that if your plans change and you cannot make it, but you did promise to be there, please also do the same courtesy and just let Twit know that, whoops, you really wish you could make it, but just, you can't get away.
Yeah, it's a great point. Following up would be awesome in that regard. grc.com is where you can go for everything that Steve talks about on this show and offers. Of course, SpinRite, which you know all about. Squirrel, like we were talking about. If you want information about Squirrel and you're like, hey, now that I've read up on it, now that I know a little more, I'll go to the event. You can find that information at grc.com. Also, audio and video of Security Now can be found there, as well as a transcript of this and other episodes can be found there as well. That's the only place that you can find the transcript. So if that's what you're looking for, grc.com. Otherwise, what you're seeing right now is our website, twit.tv/SN. This is the Security Now show page at twit.tv. And here you can also find all the audio and video of every episode of Security Now, ways to subscribe, which is really what you should do. Just go there, click on the link to your podcatcher of choice, and you'll be subscribed. You won't even have to seek out the episodes. They get delivered to you through Podcast Magic. We record this show every Tuesday, live, 1:30 p.m. Pacific, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, and we've had a time change this last Sunday. So is it 20:30 UTC or 19:30 UTC? I don't actually know. I forgot to look into this before starting the show, but check your clock. Is the best that I can do on short notice. Thank you, Steve. Always fun doing the show with you, and appreciate the opportunity.
I appreciate it, and I had a great time, and we'll do it again next week, my friend.
Absolutely. Sounds good. And also thanks to Jeff behind the board. We'll see you next week on Security Now. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Security